Have you heard about a recent article in The Atlantic? Perhaps you've read it, perhaps you found it insightful, perhaps it made you concerned. Either way, I think you will find this episode really valuable because we are going to review Jennifer Senior's work and her story as well. And Jennifer Senior is the author of the previously mentioned article in The Atlantic that actually got a significant amount of attention. If you've already heard about it, you know that. If you don't, well, let me tell you that 3 people independently of each other reached out to me and said, hey, Daniel, have you seen this article in The Atlantic? I think 1 or 2 of them just kind of mentioned that they've seen it. And I know actually 1 person just mentioned the article, and two people from the community emailed me and kind of like shared kind of their takes and points and had actually, you know, several ideas from the article, and you know, that indicated to me that there was a lot of interest, and we haven't done Heard Online in a while, so here we are. We're gonna review Jennifer Senior's findings and her story. Now, firstly, I want to say that the article in The Atlantic is behind a paywall, and I don't have any problems like paying to get access to the article, but I don't think I can then like share it openly and go over the whole thing. So unfortunately, we can't actually review the original article in The Atlantic. However, Jennifer Senior was a guest on NPR, and she discussed her article and her story there. And I have a feeling, I have a guess that there is a lot of overlap. So we're going to review the interview instead, and we're going to, you know, take it easy. We'll see. This may take a good hour. I don't even know, because there's a lot to digest. But we're going to look at this article, well, the transcript rather, from the interview from NPR. And there's a lot to be learned that will be helpful. But it's also kind of heartbreaking, and you'll see why when we come to the end of it. But a spoiler alert here, I'll say that Jennifer Senior clearly has insomnia, right? She clearly has what we call insomnia. She struggled with it for many years, and she is a very well-respected, like hardworking, dedicated, accomplished journalist who goes to great length to meet with experts in the field, like the latest research, and it doesn't really lead to anywhere helpful, right? That's the saddening thing, is the state of affairs on like planet sleep, or in our space, or in the sleep universe. There is very little like truly helpful understanding to be had. But hopefully we can be part of changing that. I was thinking actually of reaching out to Jennifer Senior before recording this, but I'll probably send a link to this to her email if I can find it. And if anybody listening to this, you know, knows her or knows how to get hold of her, then, you know, feel free to share this or any other content that is on our channel, because I think that could really be helpful. But anyways, that was the long preamble, longer than I anticipated. But with that said, let us now take a look at the transcript here. So what we're looking at is, again, a transcript, and it is from NPR. I think it's from a series there called Fresh Air, and it's titled "Can't Sleep. Journalist Jennifer Senior Says You're Not Alone in Your Insomnia." That's the, you know, kind of helpful title. Always when we know that we're not alone, that can be really helpful. It is from July 7th, and I think it's like the article in The Atlantic came out in June, so it's you know, fairly recent. And starts off by saying the following: Pulitzer Prize-winning writer Jennifer Senior has had insomnia for 25 years. Her new piece in The Atlantic is about her often futile attempts to fall asleep and about the latest research into insomnia. And then Terry Gross, the host, goes on to say, "This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross. If you've ever had trouble sleeping, you know that the more you worry about not being able to fall asleep, the more likely you are to keep staying awake." And that struck me. Like, this opening sentence really describes what insomnia is about. It is about a worry, or we can call it a fear, or we can call it, you know, behind a worry or fear is the idea that we're threatened, right? So what Terry Gross essentially is describing here is what we call insomnia. when not sleeping has become a threat for us. And Terry's also saying that the more concerned we are, the more worried we are about not sleeping, the more likely it is that we're going to stay awake. And, it's not explicitly said here, but this creates a loop, because when we're then not sleeping, we worry even more, and then we sleep even less, and then we worry even more. And we can add to this loop, like the more we worry, the more things we try, the more effort we put in, and the less we sleep. And the more we worry, the more effort, the more attempts. And this is the loop we call insomnia. And this is all really said right off the bat in this article, which shows like incredible understanding. But the next line goes, okay, so what do you do? Pills? Question mark? Or no, the question mark comes later. But the question is like, do we do pills? And this is also remarkable because there was so much understanding in the sentence we just reviewed, the understanding that it is worrying about not sleeping that creates insomnia. And then if we think about it, can a pill help with that? It really cannot, because pills don't change how we think. So in a way, Terry has already answered the question. And then after pills, it says therapy. And of course, like if that therapy like revealed the truth, which is that insomnia comes from the misunderstanding of not sleeping as a threat, then therapy can be helpful. But often therapy is not about that. So the answer is probably no. Meditation also will not change how we think about sleep, or how we think about what's happened with us as far as sleep goes. So we know that those are not answers. And so the complete sentence becomes pills, therapy, meditation, or just learn to accept that you'll feel like a zombie the next day. When I read or just learn to accept, then I'm like, okay, here they're onto something. But then it was like accepting that you'll feel like a zombie the next day, which is also not like, that's not a great option. And it misses the point, which is that it's not how many hours we sleep that determine whether we feel like a zombie or not. It's how much we judge ourselves, how much we think that there's a problem, how much we think things are not right, et cetera, et cetera. So already in the first few sentences, so much that is remarkable, right? But let's keep reading. My guest, Jennifer Senior, knows this feeling. She suddenly went from sleeping through the night to suffering from insomnia. That started about 25 years ago when she was 29. And then Terry talks a little bit about Jennifer and mentions that she's a senior staff writer, and she's reviewed the latest science. She's interviewed some of the top sleep researchers, and that her article was called Why Can't Americans Sleep? And she also mentions that she is a Pulitzer Prize winner, and she's won 2 National Magazine Awards, and she spent 5 years at the New York Times Magazine, et cetera. So like kind of going over some accolades, or sharing how much important work Jennifer has done. And keep this in mind, how accomplished Jennifer is, because we're going to talk about that towards the very end. And then Terry Gross welcomes Jennifer to the show and mentions that Terry also had trouble sleeping the night before, and woke up about 5 and couldn't go back to sleep. And when I saw this is a little bit of that. Like it reminded me of something so many guests on the channel have said, that they've had this like deep emotional, like completely upending struggle with sleep. And then someone says like, I also had some insomnia yesterday, like I couldn't get back to sleep after getting up at 5 a.m. And that can lead to this kind of mismatch where you're like, you have no clue what you're talking about. That's not insomnia. What I have is insomnia, right? So we just see that very common conversation in this very article, I think, looking at the transcript from the conversation between like Terry Gross and Jennifer Senior. Now, I think one thing I want to highlight though was kind of the end of this paragraph. So Terry Gross mentions that they had some trouble sleeping the night before, and then says, I've come to think of sleep as a talent, that some people have and some people don't. And then Senior says, you know what? I would call it gift. I mean, a talent suggests that like people have worked at it, and some people have. I want to thank you for telling me that. It is interesting post-publication how many people have written me saying, I'm a fellow traveler, and you wouldn't know. So if we just pause there, we can see that it appears to us as if Jennifer Senior understands that sleeping is not a talent. It's not like you can work really hard on sleeping and then sleep better. She probably knows this from her own lived experiences and through the research she has done. And this is a very valuable point for anyone out there listening. Sleeping is definitely not a skill or a talent or something we can achieve. In fact, it's the complete opposite. Like sleeping well, sleeping peacefully comes from effortlessness. It happens automatically, passively, when we're not trying to achieve it. So if, in fact, the more we think of it as a talent or skill, the more we're going to struggle with sleep. Now, Jennifer says that I think of it more as a gift. And I think it's more true to think of sleeping well as like in the realm of like things we would think of as gifts, meaning it's something that just happens. It's something that's passive. It's something that just kind of comes to us. But it's also tricky in the way she describes it, like it's a gift. Like some people have a gift and some people don't have a gift, because again, that makes us think that we are different from other people. And we think, I wish I had the gift they have. How can I get that gift? Why come I don't have that gift? And it keeps us in the mindset that, you know, we've been deprived of something, we're lacking something, something missing. And that keeps us like looking for the gift, wanting the gift, wondering why we don't have the gift. And that, of course, is just another way of saying that we're worried about our sleep. We think something is wrong. There's a sense that not sleeping is a threat. It's something that isn't right. You know, so I would say what is the most helpful is to see that there is no gift needed. There's no skill needed. Sleep just happens when we no longer think there's any threat or opportunity or anything going on, like when we're in an effortless state. Now, there was another thing I want to point out from this very paragraph, and that's, oh yeah, this part. So Jennifer says that so many people have written to her saying like, I'm a fellow traveler. You wouldn't even know how many people have reached out to her. And I think this is helpful to take note of, that there are a ton of people out there who are really struggling with sleep, but don't have an outlet, don't have people to talk to, don't know anybody else who's been in the same boat, right? And just knowing that we're not alone, this is actually a common struggle, I think is always helpful. You know, the less we feel like something strange or unusual that is happening with us, the more helpful. So that's just a nice point to take note of. Now let's keep going. Gross says, you're right. I like to tell people that the night before I stopped sleeping, I slept. Not only that, I slept well. And you go on to say that you used to sleep through the night, like you'd go to bed and you'd just like wake up 7 or 8 hours later. That's amazing to me. I don't think I've ever slept through the whole night in my life. What was the first sleepless night like? So let's keep reading. Senior says, puzzling. I mean, it's a cliche among sleep clinicians that everyone idealizes their pre-insomnia selves, right? They say that everybody says, oh, my sleep was perfect. I'm sorry, but my sleep really was great. And it was so consistent that I didn't need an alarm clock when I lost one. I always slept from 1 until 9 and had a standing appointments like 10 o'clock that I'd never miss. I mean, it was so remarkably regular. So that when it first happened, I thought like, have I been poisoned? And Senior goes on, I mean, I had no idea. I mean, I greeted it with bafflement and kind of curiosity more than anything else. It wasn't an alarm. It was just like, oh, that's weird. I thought sort of nothing of it until it became regular, and then really like regular, and then super intense. And then I wasn't waking up at 5 in the morning. I was just staying up all night. So, you know, it got bad in a hurry. Or as Ron Burgundy says in Anchorman, you know, that escalated quickly. I mean, just got bad. Now, we don't know the exact time frame. We just know that Jennifer says that it happened quickly. And so we can imagine that this is not, when I hear quickly in this context, I think this is definitely not a process of years. It is probably not in months. It's probably days or weeks. That's what I'm hearing when I'm reading this quickly, right? And what she's describing is actually so very common. It's the story that we hear all the time in our community. It's the story of like, we have one night where we sleep very little or none at all, and we go like, oh, that was weird. And we aren't like super anxious or panicked about that. It's just that there are some like tiny alarm bells, tiny red flags in the back of our mind, which are going kind of like, is this a problem? Maybe this is a problem. That's odd, but it's probably not a problem. It'll probably fix itself, right? But there's still like, there's some concern there. And even that little concern about sleep can lead to a place where, the next night we're going to bed and we're like, I hope that doesn't happen again. Probably won't. It'll probably okay. But you see, it's not like before when there was like, there was nothing before. There was just an assumption that we would sleep right. Now it's like a little concern, a little worry, just a little attention, a little preoccupation, and that can lead us, of course, to have like the second night of sleeping very little. And again, we may not be panicked or alarmed. We would just be like, oh, this is weird. It's happening a second night. Huh? Should I be worried? Probably not. But what is actually happening is that something has been mislabeled a threat by our brain to some degree, or maybe even just like the brain initially is just like, proposing that maybe there's a threat. But the more we pay attention, the more we're just curious, the more we're wondering, the less we sleep, and the more it appears that there is a real threat. And at some point, the brain goes like, oh my gosh, this has been going on now for like 2 weeks. This is a real threat. This is a problem. And that's when things like go bad really quickly, right? Because then we're suddenly like, our brain is in a state of alarm because we're not sleeping, right? And then we have this totally have this loop, right? We're alarmed, and because we're alarmed, we don't sleep, and because we don't sleep, we get more alarmed, etc., etc. So what I'm trying to point out here is simply that Jennifer's story is so typical, so common. Like, we've heard this a million times, and it's not strange at all to go from a place where you had zero struggles with sleep, right? You had absolutely no problems with sleep, and then you quite suddenly are in like this panic mode around your sleep. Very common story. And I think the other point Jennifer brings up here is that like the idealization of our pre-insomnia sleep, I've called that like the golden sleep fallacy, when we think back upon how we slept before and we were like, I slept absolutely perfect. And to some degree, I think we often idealize the past, true. But what can be undeniably true as well is that we may have had absolutely zero struggle with sleep in the past. If somebody objectively showed us like some measurements from our sleep, like in the past, we may see that objectively we were like, oh, I actually sometimes slept 6 hours. Oh, I woke up quite often, like, et cetera, et cetera. But there was zero struggle. And I think that's the key point here, is that Jennifer had like absolutely no struggles with sleep whatsoever in her entire life. That is true, right? And suddenly she finds herself really in a deep struggle. Very, very common story. Now, let's keep reading. And then Grossa said, did it lead to panic in bed? And then Senior says, oh God, a lot. And I remember one time I did exactly the wrong thing. You're never supposed to do this for anybody who's suffering. I left a lot of runway. I went to bed at 8 o'clock, even though, I was a 1 o'clock sleeper, because I was exhausted and because I wanted to sleep and I wanted to leave a lot of extra time. And I happened to fall asleep very quickly and then woke up thinking, oh, great, I slept through the night. And I slept until 10:30, 2 hours. Senior's just kind of describing one thing she did in an attempt to sleep. And whenever we try hard to sleep, it becomes tricky. But let's keep reading. Grossa says, what did you think was wrong with you? And Senior says, I didn't know. I mean, this is the problem. I was not perseverating or stressing or lying awake thinking about anything. People would say to me, what are you thinking about? What are you obsessing about? And I would say, my mind is a whistling prairie. It's a whistling cockshell. There's nothing in my head at all. I'm just lying there expecting to fall asleep. And so I couldn't determine what happened, honestly, really. And now it is unclear to me if Jennifer Senior here is explaining kind of like what happened initially, like before she had this kind of like panic around sleep, or if she had panics around sleep, but then there were also periods where she wouldn't panic around sleep. It's not clear to me, but she has, she just said, like, earlier when girls asked, did you like to panic in bed? And then she said, oh God, a lot, right? So at some point this became, very clearly a scenario of like panic around sleep leading to little sleep, which leads to more panic around sleep, right? But what she describes here is like the whistling prairie. There's like nothing in my brain. It's just kind of empty, but I'm just not sleeping. Also very, very, very common in our world, in our space, right? And it can be very confusing because what we teach here is that insomnia comes from our brain mislabeling not sleeping as a threat, which leads us to be worried and anxious, and that keeps us awake, right? And we end up in this loop, right? But then you can think, but that's not my case. I'm calm as a cucumber. Like, I have no worry thoughts. I'm just laying there and sleep just doesn't happen. And we call that the wonder wall. And what's happening here is that you're not panicking around the fact that you're not sleeping. You're not, alarmed, but you're curious. You're wondering, right? There are questions around your sleep. You're kind of anticipating sleep to happen, but it doesn't. You're wondering why, and that's enough to keep us awake. It's not like a huge panic that is required for us not to sleep. Sometimes we're just wondering about something. We're just curious about our sleep, and we call this the wonder wall. It's very, very common, and that of course resolves when we see that, oh, it's just me wondering if I'll sleep or not, or like it's just my curiosity about sleep that is keeping me awake. Well, then we're not curious about that anymore. We're like, oh, I'm just awake because I've been curious about my sleep. Nothing strange or unusual going on. Then our curiosity fades, the wonder wall comes down, and sleep happens on its own. So I just want to point out that Jennifer described like this wonder wall situation clearly here. And then the next question becomes the following. The only thing that I think you were thinking was like, I can't fall asleep. Oh God, give me sleep. And then she says, oh, so eventually you do the countdown clock. Absolutely. So that's like down the road. In the beginning, it was just like all bewilderment and like, this must be biologically driven. What happened? Eventually it was sheer body panic. So actually Jennifer explains that it started with this kind of wonder wall scenario, but then that led to panic. It was sheer blinding panic where my mind was racing and I was going, what's going on? Something must be happening. Oh my God. And I'd be staring at the clock and going, oh my God, now I only have 5 hours to sleep. Now I only have 4 hours to sleep. Now I only have 3, now only 2. This is what we call sleep math. Now I have 20 minutes. I mean, that was certainly happening. And there would also be this kind of sound cloud of, I'm going to get fired. I'm not going to be able to do my job. I'll never be an appealing girlfriend. Any of these things, right? Like I'm thinking those as I'm 29, I'll be perceived as a basket case, or I'll not be able to exercise. I was quite active. I'd run, I'd do whatever. And eventually I would have these weird repetitive thoughts. This is essentially like catastrophizing, or thinking about like all the things that will happen if you don't get enough sleep, right? And at the time I was covering like theater. It was a really fun job. I was covering theater for New York Magazine for no money, just writing all these kinds of squibs about things that would open. And I would see all these kind of cool musicals like Hedwig and the Angry Inch, cool stuff. And snippets of songs would run through my head. And I would just sit there and think, would the orchestra please pack up and go home, right? So for this section, again, I think what we're learning here is that clearly Jennifer Senior was experiencing what we call insomnia, right? No doubts about it. Not only is it just the kind of like the primary concern, like I'm not sleeping and I should be sleeping, that can lead us to be really concerned. We think something's wrong with us, but it's also the kind of the secondary attachments, like the secondary things we think sleep will bring and that we're afraid of not getting. Like we think, if I don't sleep enough, my skin won't be good. Like I won't look good, right? If I don't sleep enough, I won't be able to function at work, right? So this adds to the pressure to sleep. It adds to the sense that not sleeping is a threat, right? Very, very common. Okay, let's keep reading. And Senior thought, like, I can't deal with this. And then the interviewer says, so among the things you tried early on were acupuncture, Tylenol PM, melatonin, running for miles, breathing, exercising, listening to a meditation tape. What did you learn about those approaches and how effective were they for you? And what did you learn about yourself after trying them? So then it goes to say that I learned I'd never done acupuncture before, and I learned that it was wonderful, just not particularly helpful for that. So she's saying that like acupuncture was really nice and pleasant, but it didn't do anything for my sleep. Acupressure too, same thing. I also learned that there was this whole alternative medicine kind of shadow world that was starting to bloom back in the 90s. Maybe it had even before. I learned that once you're in a certain state of panic, trying to meditate is very hard because it's something that most people fail at initially. I mean, there's no such thing as failing when you meditate. Great point. You always have to bring yourself back to paying attention to your body and to a mantra or whatever your form of meditation you do. Your mind is prone to wander. That's what it does. But if you're having trouble sleeping, that's super alarming quality to be noticing in yourself. And it's wandering to catastrophic thoughts. So I noticed that melatonin, particularly in the megawatt doses, that makes you just feel, and then there's a break there. But what we're getting towards here is what we call sleep efforts. So a sleep effort is anything that we do in an attempt to achieve sleep. Expressed another way, we can say it's a safety behavior. A sleep effort is anything we do to try to escape a perceived threat. We're trying to escape this threat of not sleeping with a sleep effort. And these are exactly what's mentioned here, like the melatonin, the exercising a lot, the like avoiding coffee, taking medications, all these type of things. And the reason that they're not helpful is that peaceful sleep is an effortless process. It happens automatically without us trying to do anything. And when we introduce effort, when we're trying to sleep, that keeps us from that effortless sleep. And if something doesn't do anything, like acupuncture, that's not really helpful because we get a sense that, oh no, I tried this and that didn't work for me. Something must be really wrong with me, right? But even if something seems to work, like let's say Jennifer had done acupuncture and then slept great the next day, that's also tricky because that leads to the idea that, oh, I'm different from other people. I need to do things like acupuncture to sleep. And also ideas like, do I have to do acupuncture every day now? And so whether it seems to work or not, it leads to kind of more effort and away from the effortless state, which she is noticing here. Now, the article goes into kind of like melatonin doses, and I don't think this is particularly interesting for us. So we'll just skip the discussion about melatonin, and we can talk about circadian rhythms. So then there's there are questions about whether it's important to kind of like have a strict strict sleep times when we've been struggling with sleep. And Senior says yes. The theory is that your body is already she's just making the case here that there's really no evidence that like extra melatonin is helpful. Sorry about that. And Gross says, so you interviewed a lot of sleep researchers, and the first question you asked each of them was, what's the myth about sleep that you'd most like to debunk? And what was the most frequent answer? That you need 8 hours. And the interviewer says, when I read that, I shared because for me, she's saying like, if I'm in bed for 7 hours, I feel like it's a victory of mine or something like that. So anyway, I think the interviewer was kind of relieved that we don't have to sleep 8 hours, right? And that's and I think this is a helpful myth to be debunked. There's no evidence that says that sleeping 8 hours is important or good for health or anything like that. I don't really know where the 8-hour number comes from. I think it's just like there are 24 hours in the entire day, and 8 is kind of like a neat third of that. So somebody probably just said, oh, we should sleep 8 hours, maybe something like that. Who knows? Now, on one hand, I'm glad that people no longer are saying like you need your 8 hours to sleep, that this myth is becoming debunked. But on the other hand, I don't think this is necessarily new. I've been like doing this, like teaching online about sleep for what about like 7 years or something like that now. And I think already then when I started, that myth about 8 was already kind of like cracking. Like it was people were no longer talking so much about you need 8 hours, right? So I don't think this is particularly new. I don't think it's earth shattering, but I think it's still very, very nice to hear that many sleep researchers now say that it is a myth. The 8-hour sleep thing is a myth. What more did the sleep researchers say? Well, Senior says, it wasn't that they said you really don't need it. They said that this was a myth out there that was just kind of tyranny. And I'll explain why. I spoke to so many people that I was really struck by how many people did say it. So here are the things to bear in mind. Obviously, people vary, right? And there's even this vanishingly but really interesting small number of people who are called short sleepers. So I think we can skip over this part and just say, like, Jennifer is making the point that is like very commonsensical. I think that some of us humans are tall, some of us are short, some of us are big feet, some have small feet, some of us have like big ears, some of us have small ears. We're all different. And of course, the same is true with sleep. Like some naturally sleep longer, some naturally sleep shorter, and it's just like that. It's like sleep needs to vary from person to person. And but I think what really matters is that there's no evidence whatsoever that short sleep or little sleep causes any health issues, right? I'm not going to take over this episode and talk about like the research I've done on that, but just want to say there's no evidence or whatever. Like regardless of if you're naturally more of a long sleeper or short sleeper, that has no implications for your health. And even if you're a naturally short sleeper or a long sleeper and you sleep less than you would like to, that also has not been shown to impact your health in any way. So just sneaking that in there. Now let's keep reading. Okay, we don't have to stay here very long, but Senior had noticed that there is a lot of literature on kind of like sleep duration and health. And one study was done by somebody named Kripke, looking at 1 million people, and 6 to 5 hours to 7.0 hours was associated with the best health outcomes. But then Senior makes a very, very important observation, saying like, there are design issues with all these studies, right? They're almost by definition going to be observational. They're not going to be randomized. So it's not like you can actually show any causality. Like there is no study that is a big randomized study looking at people's sleep duration and any particular health outcome. Like imagine doing that. Like you'd have, like, look at dementia, for example, like, which is so common that people are concerned about. How would you prove that short sleep causes dementia? You would need like a study of like tens of thousands of people, and you need to force half of them to sleep, let's say, less than 4 hours per night, and make sure the other half slept more than, let's say, 7 hours per night, and then follow them over decades to see if one group had more dementia than another group. That study cannot be done. So what people have done is instead these observational studies where they ask people, how much do you think you sleep per night? And then they go like, okay, they collect that data, and then they look at these people's health records. And so with that in mind, is it surprising that most people will report sleeping what is considered normal? Like if you have no troubles with your health and no trouble with your sleep, you're probably going to be like, oh, I think I sleep about 7 hours. You check that in the questionnaire. But if you have a lot of health issues, they're very likely to impact your sleep, either in the direction of like you're having like really fragmented sleep, really you kind of like not sleeping well, and you estimate sleeping like less than 5 hours, let's say, or you're really tired from your health issues and you're like, I sleep all the time, I'm just always exhausted, I sleep like 8 hours. And that's why you easily find this link between short sleep and long sleep and any health outcome. By the way, the link is stronger between long sleep and like poor health outcomes than it is between short sleep and long health and any like poor health outcomes. But we don't hear about that because people like to alarm us. So they always make it sound like it is like short sleep that has that is causing health outcomes, but in poor health outcomes. But in reality, there's no evidence that short sleep or long sleep causes any health issues. They're just associations that are easily explained because health issues, of course, cause sleep disruption. They impact our sleep, right? So a little side note there. All right, let's keep going. Girl said, so people who are night owls usually get scolded. And then Senior shares that there is actually, conflicting data there. There's no conclusive evidence that like sleep timing matters as far as your health goes. And then we go over to a kind of different topic here. So the interviewer asks, let's start with with why you think the discussion around drugs needs to be reframed. And then Senior, essentially, I'm going to kind of paraphrase here, but Jennifer says that when it comes to antidepressants, the stigma around them has faded away. She's saying that nowadays people have no problem sharing that they're on an antidepressant, but she says there's still a lot of stigma around sleep medications and that people are very hesitant about sharing this. And there's a lot of fear around taking sleep medications. And she said that she herself was very, very scared of taking sleep medications, right? And she resisted this for the longest period of time. And I don't know, to be honest with you. Maybe you have an idea on this. Like, is it true that there's a lot of stigma around sleeping pills or compared to antidepressants? I don't know. Like, if somebody asked me, I would say like it's probably similar. But what I think is really, really helpful to know here is that sleeping pills do not produce sleep. That's physiologically impossible. And we already talked in the beginning of this article about how insomnia is about not sleeping because we are concerned about not sleeping. And of course, no pill will really change that. Sleeping pills that are available, like, this is not a medical device, but generally speaking, sleeping pills have been like through like FDA, they've been tested, they're perfectly safe, And I think what I'm pointing here towards is like I'm getting towards, I think, a similar point to the one Jennifer is making, that if we create all this, like, let's say, stigma around sleep medications, and we think it's super important not to take them, or we think it's super important to take them, we think they're really, really important, or it's really important that we don't take them, we're in a high stakes environment. We think something really serious is going on, like we're really going to be worried about our sleep. And that is not helpful. On the other hand, if we see that sleeping medications, they don't make us sleep, whether we take them or not, isn't going to really change our sleep. There's no concerns about the health implications of sleep medications, then we're in like this low stakes field. It's like, I can take it if I want to. I don't have to take it. It doesn't really matter if I take it or not. In that low stakes environment, that really leads to peaceful sleep. I think that's a nice point to be made. And now Jennifer says that like she herself, like, really for the longest time resisted taking sleep medications. And she says that because of that, she's not dependent on them. That could be another, like, a whole discussion in itself. I don't think the fact that we really resisted something in itself makes us dependent on it. But again, we can talk about that in some other episode. Okay, so we talk about the stigma here, and I think let's move forward. Okay, so we're still talking about medications here. And benzodiazepines. Okay, here's kind of interesting things that, like some statistics here that says that 30 to 35% of Americans suffer from some symptoms of insomnia, at least temporarily, and 12% from insomnia is a really obdurate condition. So that's at least 12%. So that means like a good chunk of the adult population struggle with sleep. That's not new to us. We already knew that, but it's, again, always helpful to know that we're not alone. And then there's kind of a reintroduction here. Okay, and now we get to CBT-I. So then Gross says, like, let's talk about psychological therapies that are tried for insomnia. And one of them is CBT-I. So that stands for cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So would you describe what therapy is? You've read about it. You've also tried it twice. And then Jennifer Senior says, yes, I have. Okay, and start with, it is a very effective therapy. It's just very hard to do. And then she describes kind of CBT-I, kind of give this an overview of what CBT-I is and describing kind of the sleep diaries and the sleep window and things of that nature. But then she says, the problem is that as you're doing like CBT-I, there's a soundtrack of terror in your head. Oh no, now I've only got 4 hours. Now I've only got 3. There's another paradoxical kind of soundtrack. I mean, this is the kind of piece of CBT, which is that you have to change your thinking around sleep. What the most persuasive person about this, on the side told me was his name is Wilfred Pigeon, and he was delightful. What he said to me was like, look, just because you've smoked for 20 years doesn't mean you shouldn't stop smoking, right? You're looking for from this point forward, right? And what health benefits are you going to get from not smoking this moment forward? Same thing with not sleeping. Like, just forget it, right? Let's like, you're done. And now you got to refocus and think, oh, this is going to be so good for my health. Well, that part is, of course, tricky, because if you think like, oh, sleeping is going to be so good for my health, then firstly, there's no evidence to back that up. But secondly, it's going to create a lot of pressure for us, which is really tricky. But anyway, what I wanted to get to here was that if you read this transcript, you see that Jennifer Steiner really struggled with CBT-I, and describes it as incredibly painful, and it didn't lead her to a place of peaceful sleep for the rest of her life. In fact, she tried it twice, and it didn't lead her there. Yet, she describes it as very effective. So I think the way she understands it is that, like, I couldn't do it, but for somebody who can do it, it's really effective. When I highly, highly doubt that. I think that we get, the reports of how effective CBT-I are, they come from academia, where these studies have been designed to look at the effectiveness of CBT-I, and the impact is typically measured not in kind of like the subjective, how worried about sleep are you? How do you feel you sleep right now? Are you struggling with sleep? Yes or no? That would be kind of meaningful, because if people did CBT-I and then were like, yeah, I don't worry about sleep anymore. I don't track my sleep. I don't measure my sleep. I'm sleeping just fine. Then it would be like, oh, that's interesting. But what these studies are looking at are numbers. Like, did the sleep efficiency improve in this study? Did sleep onset latency improve in this study? And if you kind of compress somebody's sleep a lot, they may very well fall asleep sooner. But is that success if somebody falls asleep like 5 minutes faster, but they're still panicked, all day long about their sleep? I would say no, that's not success at all. And unfortunately, this is the type of success that is described in the bulk of these articles about CBT-I, which claim it to be very effective. And I think the lived experience is much more powerful. Like, Jennifer Steiner has had the lived experience of really hating CBT-I and not getting any benefit from it. And I think that is very much echoed in our community. And by the way, if somebody is hearing this and saying like, well, CBT-I was great for me, it led me to a struggle-free life, that's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. But the question is, what led you there, right? I think in some shape or form, it's going to be the idea that, oh, there's nothing to worry about. I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. And you don't get there by like spending 5 hours in bed each night, or by like jumping out of bed after 15 minutes if you don't sleep. What leads you there is just like understanding, education, and so so it's not like the behavioral techniques that people really, really struggle with that lead to peace of mind, peaceful sleep. It is education, and it's and that is just something I wanted to highlight. Okay, so that was the CBT-I part. And then, in the sake of like, there's a discussion here about like depression and insomnia, if one causes the other, and things of that nature, which I don't want to discuss right now because it's going to be such a long discussion. But the gist of it is that I don't see them as like, I don't see like depression or insomnia or anxiety, PTSD, as different disorders, but rather just like different experiences that come from tokenization. If anything becomes thought of as a threat to us, we can respond to that with sadness. Like, we can think, oh, this is a real problem and I can't do anything about it. There's nothing I can do. Then we become really sad, right? And then we can react to that and be like, I'm feeling sad all the time. This is not good. That's such a threat to us. Then we feel even more sad because we think we're threatened, and we respond with sadness. And that's kind of the depression loop, right? And insomnia is another loop, but the anatomy is just the same. It's just like something has been tokenized, something has been misinterpreted as a threat, whether it is feeling sad, feeling anxious, memories, or not sleeping. It doesn't matter. They can all lead to the same like inner struggle. So to me, it's not like depression causes anxiety or insomnia causes, depression causes insomnia or insomnia causes depression. It's like they're just two variations of the same struggle. And it's not surprising that we have both at one point, because, the brain is in a threatened state and it's going to respond with not sleeping sometimes, it's going to respond with sadness sometimes, and so forth. So let's keep going here. And we talked a little bit about antidepressants, and again, we're in this kind of like discussion about depression and insomnia. And now I think, again, I'm gonna kind of summarize this for you instead of reading it. What Jennifer talks about here is that she also struggled with long COVID and POTS and something called MCAS, and POTS is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and MCAS is mast cell activation syndrome. And there was one more thing I wanted to ask about. Like, so the COVID, of course, like this started, a couple of years ago when we had like the COVID pandemic. And then the interviewer asked like if she's doing any better from the standpoint of long COVID, and then said, and Jennifer says here, I'm worse. I'm a lot worse, which was very saddening to hear. And so my point here is that not only did Jennifer struggle with insomnia, she's clearly also struggled with long COVID, with POTS, with MCAS. And again, to me, these are not like different disorders, but rather just different ways we can experience the inner struggle, like dizziness, so common when our mind is in a threatened state, right? Pain, very, very common, like nausea, very common, no appetite, uncommon, like kind of neurological symptoms, like being jumpy and jerky and like worrisome thoughts, all this super common when our mind is in a threatened state, which comes from tokenization. I think what part of what is so saddening with this article is that there is this huge part missing, which is the part that's missing is that all that's described here is just one struggle. It's just one struggle that comes from one type of misunderstanding, and that misunderstanding is the brain mislabeling something as a threat that isn't a real threat. And Jennifer, again, goes to great lengths of understanding her insomnia and how to meet it, but it's really not getting any meaningful help. In fact, whatever she's told, whatever she finds, leads her to be worse, much worse. And that's the saddening part here. And then the interviewer asks about sorry here, I'm not clicking the right windows here, but then the interviewer is asking her about like her sleep and how things are going there. And then Jennifer says that she can describe things as being better. She's saying like, I'm no longer like panicked. I'm no longer like completely like coming apart when I don't sleep, because having struggled with sleep for many years, she has learned that like there is no like catastrophic event when she doesn't sleep, right? There, she's learned that she still like wakes up, she still gets her things done the next day. She's still okay. She's still essentially safe, right? So the kind of like the panicky aspect of the struggle is gone. However, she's clearly still struggling with insomnia, right? And not only is she clearly struggling with insomnia, she has arrived at a place where she's decided to take a leave of absence from her work. So that's kind of like towards the end of this article. And what she says is, again, that I've decided at this point to take a break from work. I'm not going to be working at this point, which was one of the most heartbreaking things that I came across reading this transcript, because again, Jennifer Sears is clearly a very hardworking, dedicated journalist who I think loves her work, loves doing, Jennifer has decided to take an 18-month, or what did she say? Let's check it out together. She's asked here, yes, the question here is like, it sounds life-changing. Has it changed your sense of identity? Totally, and it's life-changing. I'm taking an 18-month leave from the Atlantic. And the kind of the entry goes like, oh, I might write a book. We don't really know. She's like, her identity has changed. She talks about how both, it sounds like both the COVID, the insomnia, everything goes through her, like change her identity. And we left, like the article is kind of like concluded where Jennifer Sainer says like, this has changed my identity, and now I'm taking leave from my work. And this, I think, was so saddening, because again, I think she seems to be a journalist who loves what she's doing. She's clearly very good at it, but all her research into what we call the inner struggle has led her to a place where she's, it doesn't sound like she's better off. In fact, she's taking leave of work, and things are, I think, sounds like really tricky for her. So again, if anybody knows Jennifer, how to reach her, maybe point her towards our channel. Maybe there's things here that could really help her. But yeah, before we conclude, I wrote down 3 things that I thought could be really helpful to talk about. First thing is that, remember in the beginning, I said, like, pay attention to how successful Jennifer Senior has been as a writer, as a journalist. And this is with, like, during insomnia. Like, she clearly has insomnia. And even with insomnia, with like the sleep struggle, she has not only done phenomenally well as a writer. I just like asked ChatGPT. She's married. She has a kid. Like she when you see the picture, does not look like somebody who's like unhealthy in any way. And why I point this out is that we often think, oh, if I don't get this under control, if I don't sleep well, if I don't get sleep tonight, I'm not going to be able to function at work. I'm going to look completely unhealthy. I'm not going to meet anyone. I'm not going to have children, etc. She is living proof that that is not the case. Despite her ongoing struggle, Jennifer Senior herself is like living proof that you can do really, really well, even if you sleep little. And paradoxically, like when we see that, we can be like, oh, so I don't need to sleep X amount. I don't need like perfect sleep. I don't need anything like that to do really well as a journalist, to have a marriage, to have a son, to be healthy, etc. That really lowers the pressure to sleep, and sleep happens easier. So I want to point that out. We already talked about how there isn't like many different mental health conditions like POTS, MCAS, insomnia, depression, PTSD, anxiety, etc. They're all just expressions of tokenization and the threatened state. They're all just variations of what we call the inner struggle. And again, yeah, I already made this point, so I'll just say it briefly again, that despite going to kind of the cutting edge of like modern science, talking to the experts in the field, Jennifer doesn't get the answers as for what insomnia is and how to leave the struggle that I think could actually do that for her and millions of others. So hopefully we can make a difference. Hopefully a Heard Online episode like this can reach someone who has struggled, who leaves the struggle, who then tells other people about like the path out of the struggle, who then teaches other people, and then we can have a real revolution brewing. But anyway, let's conclude here. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Heard Online, and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now. Hi, it's me, Daniel, and I hope you really found a lot of value in the video you just saw. Now I have a question for you. Did you hit the like button? Did you leave a comment? If not, then please consider that, because that is what leads to people finding us, finding peaceful sleep and peace of mind and feeling like themselves again, and all the other wonderful things that come from understanding what insomnia is really all about. So yes, just hit that like button, leave a comment, and that will help so much. Thank you.